My name is Dan Jacobson. I chair this committee. I'd like to start with a roll call. Could we start with Jose?
Jose Campos.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Dan Jacobson.
Katrina Salazar.
And Katrina has been appointed by the president of the board to sit in today in Mary's spot, although Mary may join us shortly. So the first order of business is the approval of the minutes from the July 25, 2019 meeting.
I move approval.
Approval has been moved. Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Is there any comment from the board? Any comment from the public? With that, I'd like a roll call, please.
Okay, Jose Campos,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
and Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
The minutes of the July 25 meeting is approved. Number 2 is discussion and possible action to initiate a rulemaking to amend 16 CCR section 2.8, the definition of satisfactory evidence. I have consulted with and have been told by our counsel that the first 2 pages of the memorandum that we got, we can only discuss those first 2 pages because they deal with a template that is not really noticed here, can only be discussed in relation to that which is noticed, which is the rulemaking. So if staff and the members could comply with that request from council, I'd appreciate it. Dominic, are you ready to
on
go?
that particular note, the template change is not something we anticipated noticing nor getting board approval on. Template changes on agenda items are generally a function that Ms. Bowers and staff do to make sure the information we prepare to members is conveyed in such a way that it's useful and easily digestible and members can act on accordingly. We always value any input members may have on suggestions to the template format, whether or not it's our existing template or any of the newer templates that we may bring forward. But generally, as a kind of rule of form, we don't seek member input on the templates themselves. The few exceptions are things like sunset review, maybe the mobility report, where those documents are going to be distributed to the legislature and such. So I had no anticipation of board taking a motion to adopt the revised template format, but I do value any input or any direction members may have so that it can continue to evolve and be useful for members. So I hope that addresses the first part of
No problem. Just if you could just move on to the rulemaking.
all right, perfect. Thank you. So again, as the chair had noted, the memorandum was prepared to kind of just inform members that there has been a change to the agenda item that deals with when the board is on the cusp of initiating a rulemaking and to amend the CBA regulations. And staff, we developed a new template for kind of 2 purposes. 1, to provide members increased opportunity to evaluate the rationale and fiscal impact that will underpin any regulatory action it may take. And 2nd, to improve the efficiency in preparing any of the important rulemaking materials. Historically, when considering a rulemaking change, members would consider really the overall policy and then review some draft language that would effectuate the policy change if one was determined necessary by the board. Staff would then go back to the office, prepare various documents for submission to other state agencies, one of which, and the most time-consuming of which, is the initial statement of reasons, or what's commonly referred to as the ISR. The template staff have developed for the new material for the board uses the framework of the ISR And using this template will allow the CBA increased opportunity to kind of opine on the overall shape of the ISR, the underlying rationale associated with the policy change. And additionally, by developing the information that makes up the ISR at this earlier stage, staff will be able to just kind of quickly transfer that information right into the ISR and will be able to incorporate any CBA-related edits into that ISR prior to submission, which just makes the process quicker and easier for continuing the rulemaking process within the board office. So moving on to the attachment, which is the actual agenda item. For this, members will be discussing possible adoption of amended regulatory language to Title 16 CCR Section 2.8, which is definition of satisfactory evidence. So as this is the first time members will have reviewed this new format, I'll spend a little bit of time in each section covering the material. One thing I would like to point out up front is that there is a great deal of repetition related to the various points and rationale that make up that new template. And this is really endemic of the rulemaking process with thoughts and concepts needing to be kind of reiterated in each independent section, and you'll see it in any ISR we ever produce. You'll see a lot of the same thoughts and process either talked about, repeated, or expanded upon in various sections. So beginning with the introduction, on pages 1 and 2 of the item, this section provides a quick snapshot of the CBA and provides the applicable business and profession code sections that authorize the CBA to adopt regulations in those sections that the CBA is seeking to interpret or make specific. For this specific rulemaking, the sections are BPC sections 5010 and 5094, which authorize the adoptions of the regulations, and BPC sections 5092, 5093, 5094, 5094.3, and 5094.6 are the sections related to what the regulation is seeking to interpret or make specific. These sections deal with educational requirements for entrance to the uniform CPA examination and initial licensure applications. The introduction also seeks to provide just a really quick snapshot of what the proposal is seeking to accomplish, which for this item is noted in the last paragraph. And basically the proposal is designed to streamline how the CBA may receive certified transcripts, including the ability to receive certified transcripts via secure electronic method directly from the educational institution. The next section is problem being addressed and is in the middle of page 2. Staff have noted the process presently requires applicants to have the educational institutions send their certified transcripts directly to the CBA. Staff note that this oftentimes takes several weeks to occur, which delays the applicant's ability to be admitted to the CPA exam or obtain licensure. It also creates a process whereby the applications and the transcripts are received separate and apart from one another, and which then requires additional staff time to pair up the documents. Finally, staff note that the method is presently mail only and limits the CBA and educational institutions from using electronic methods that would be faster and more efficient. So moving on to the section entitled Anticipated Benefits from the Regulatory Action. This is on the bottom of page 2 and top of page 3. We note that the primary benefits are the proposed amendments create much needed flexibility for the receipt of transcript, including receiving them via electronic means. The next section is factual basis and rationale, and this is on page 3. This section focuses primarily on the language itself and highlights what the specific text of the proposal will do. The specific text can be of the proposal is found in the attachment to the material to this actual item. And this section provides a considerable recitation of the other sections related to improved efficiency that would come with the amended language, including modernization of receiving transcripts via electronic methods. Moving on to page 4, this section on there is consumer, I believe it's consumer protection. A connection must be made regarding how the proposed regulatory change will affect consumer protection. For this proposal, it ties back to ensuring that specified educational requirements are met. The next section is underlying data. Rulemaking files include information considered by the CBA that form the policy around the affected regulatory change, including the meeting in which the CBA directed the initiation of the rulemaking. So for this item, It will be this paper, and then the meeting minutes that associate with this meeting will be included in the ISR. The next two sections relate to business and economic impact assessment. The CBA has made initial determinations that this regulatory proposal would not have a significant statewide adverse economic impact, and the proposal will not create or eliminate jobs or businesses. Lastly, on page 5 are the final two categories that make up the ISR: specific technologies or equipment, and consideration of alternatives. This proposal doesn't mandate any specific technologies or equipment, and as for consideration of alternatives, the CBA must identify any reasonable alternative it considered, including maintaining status quo, and provide a rationale for why it rejected any alternatives. In this case, staff have identified that the status quo is the only alternative and have included rationale for why the CBA has rejected such alternative. A staff recommendation on initiating the rulemaking can be found on page 6 of your material. At this point, I would like to turn discussion back over to the chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions members may have.
Are there any questions from the membership?
I do have a question.
Yes, but if you can address.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Franzella, for that summary of the new template and as well the actual agenda item. Is there a risk? I didn't see a risk analysis. Is there a risk to receiving the transcripts essentially from the applicant? First, I want to understand, how would the applicant provide the transcripts to the CBA? Do they get mailed? Is it in person? Is it by email? And then, is there any risk to receiving altered transcripts?
There's always a risk with receiving transcripts. I don't foresee it as a significant risk. The way they generally come in right now are through from the educational institution, but under this definition, there is the ability to receive them under other circumstances, extraordinary circumstances, I believe. And from time to time, we accept them coming in from the students. They get mailed in generally when they mail their payment in, their remittance form. At that time, that starts the application process for it. Comes in with their money, it's associated with the remittance. We have the transcripts, and staff have reviewed tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of transcripts and know what the transcripts, how they come in from the educational institutions, what would be flagged as potentially fraudulent in nature. But by and large, that is very insignificant, if almost non-existent to a degree. I don't think I've experienced that much in my time with the board for the 14 years I've been there. So staff would know how to look at those, and if they came in and we had any concerns, we would reach out to the applicant, contact the school. We've been in contact with schools in the past to determine whether or not these transcripts are in fact the actual transcripts, and do some research. And if we had any concerns, we would require them to submit them directly from the school. So I don't foresee any significant issues with this methodology.
And also, I understand we want to provide this option so that it expedites the process to getting the application going. So if the applicant will be submitting their own transcripts, will the official transcript from the university then come, or that's no longer a requirement?
These are the official transcripts. These would be the transcripts that, for example, if I would go to Sac State and say I would like a copy of my transcripts, I could generally get them relatively quickly, pay an extra fee, they'd come sealed in their envelope, they're marked official. Those are what we'd be accepting, so the certified transcript.
So it is still the certified transcript?
It is still the certified transcript. It's just their opportunity to take care of it then, rather than the process of going there, requesting, and I've understand those can take 4, 6, 8 weeks to come, as opposed to something as quickly as maybe within a day or two to the applicant or to the individual themselves.
And I had one last question, Cynthia. On the ISR, I think it's second to the last section, it's on page 5, specific technologies or equipment. Why wouldn't we cite a secure network under this section in order to receive the transcripts electronically?
We do require that it be in a secure methodology, but we don't specify exactly what that is. And part of it is it'll be dovetailed in with whatever the California, I don't know what they're called now, the technology officer. It's changed names a couple of times since I've been there, but we're also not going to say it has to meet those requirements, and those are ever evolving. And then I don't know how we're going to do it at this particular point. It might be that one institution feeds us this way and another feeds us that way, so it won't require that they have to use a very specific set of this web browser or this
Right.
portal or this that it can feed in certain ways. So that's why it's more generic, of it's not a specific.
So the fact that we will require a secure network is a given.
Yeah, as it comes in, and I don't have an issue of adding that particular piece in there to just
I
generally
would
say.
like to see it.
And so that's not an issue, and I'm happy to put that in there, but it's not like we're going to tell them they have to use a specific portal.
Are there any other questions? Jose?
This regulatory language change, this is responsive to the prior discussions we'd had about students wanting, or candidates wanting to get their exam process started quicker. So this is in relation, I know ultimately you need this for an application or your final application, but is this also sort of covering the need we have for the transcripts and the examination application?
Yeah, I think this is one of about 2 or 3 things that have evolved over, I want to say, beginning earlier this year related to evaluation of transcripts and examination processing. I know one of the other items that we're working on that came out of the last meeting related to sitting for the exam a little bit earlier, 6 months, we're working through some of the policy pieces on that, and this would dovetail into some of that as well.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
So this is one of the elements related to that, because the question that I had in my mind was the students who have a combination undergrad, master's, and they don't necessarily have their final transcript yet, and so that might be dealt with separately, or?
Yeah, Mr. Bone and I had actually spent a little bit of time chatting about that. There's already a statutory allowance for those individuals anyways, but this would assist in that as well. I think everything's trying to build on one another. They're all just attacked in different ways, and they can be attacked independently of one another and work through independently and even roll out independently of one another, but they're all kind of working to address those
So the
issues.
more on-point question there is, there wasn't anything we needed to revise in here to deal with that particular issue?
Not on that particular issue. I think that's more, right now, that would have at least be looked at somewhat in the statutory environment for that master's
Gotcha.
certificate, those 5-year kind of programs.
Anything else?
Yeah, oh, sorry, no, please,
Oh.
I'll be last.
So this is Katrina Salazar. I would just comment, thank you for bringing this to the committee for a vote. Thank you for appointing me temporarily for the day on this committee. But I think it's exciting because I look at this, as you have highlighted, as part of a larger approach to try to remove the barriers to entry for the students who seem to be anxious to test in the summer months and get started. And there is research that I have seen at presentations which indicates the closer to the university education the exam process is started, the better the outcomes are for the students. So I guess I would just say that this is exciting, and I think it's part of trying to reduce barriers to entry within our profession, and I think that's exciting to help make sure that there are enough CPAs for the consumers in our state. So thank you so much for bringing this to us.
Anything further?
I have,
Oh, yes.
I have a couple of things. So regarding the secure electronic method language, I think that's a great idea to have established some sort of secure electronic method to have the transcripts delivered. I am not entirely certain whether that will meet the clarity standard for OAL, so we're going to have to do a little bit more digging on that to make sure that OAL will approve the language to say that it is sufficiently clear so that the applicant knows that they can't just scan it and email it. You know what I mean? There'll have to be a little bit more information as to what that actually looks like. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just responding to that, the secure electronic method is not for the applicant. So the secure electronic is tied back to the educational institution. So it's the educational institution who's.
Oh.
So
Thank you.
not the scanning part.
Thank you,
Sorry.
yes, you're right, thank you, sorry about
No,
that.
that's fine.
Okay, thank you. And then also, I just wanted to clarify that, that when the committee reviews the ISR and when the board later reviews it, I still need to, to put my eyes on it a little bit longer. I didn't have a ton of time prior to the meeting to do official legal review. It does look really good, so I'm expecting that there won't be too many, edits, but I still do need to review it to make sure that OAL doesn't kick it back.
Thank you.
I would move approval of the recommendation that's laid out in page 6 of the memorandum.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve this item. Is there any further discussion amongst the board?
So I have a few items that are in the vein of Ileana's point on this requiring further review, maybe just some observations based on what we see. I mean, I thought I like the layout, and I like you anticipating what the ISR is going to ultimately require. Couple points would be under business impact, whether there's other items there, and the only, I know we had a lot of input from professors and others, right? Just going back to those notes and making sure that there isn't something else that from a business standpoint makes sense to include in there. The only one that really came to mind is, are other states already facilitating sort of transcript deliveries under these methods, right? So that we're sort of doing something more restrictive than what other states might be doing. And that may or may not be the case, and may or may not fit into this category, but just an item for you to consider for the next phase of that. And I think similarly under consideration of alternatives, in that second pair, we say maintain status quo, and I get that, and we use the phrase does not affect the necessary changes. And I think what I gathered from that is that what we're saying is either doing nothing won't allow us to implement changes that we think are necessary for the current times, but you may want to just look at that verbiage in that vicinity. And then under the problems, I guess this was sort of further back on page 2, the problem being addressed, and we mentioned this pairing up of transcripts. And I think what you're saying is that if a student goes and gets the certified copies and obtains it real time with the application that they mail in, it'll already be paired up when we receive it. But if you're getting secured electronic delivery, you're still going to have a pairing up scenario, I would assume.
Likely not in the same vein, because they do apply online for examination. We can look at it a little bit differently for initial licensing, but I have a feeling by the time we implement this, we'll have the online application related. If my anticipation is we will be pairing it up via certain information, so it'll go into the electronic file as opposed to a paper file that we presently
Gotcha.
have.
So the key observation for you is just look at the language
Will do.
around that, just to make sure, okay, does this just to make sure that the clarity of the problem that we think we're addressing is covered by how we say it there.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything further amongst the members? Is there any public comment? With that, I'd like a roll call vote, please.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
and Jose Campos.
Yes.
The motion has passed. Dominic, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peter Renovitz, if you want to take the chair of honor. The next item is item number 3, pending statutory changes effective January 1, 2020 to the Business Professions Code.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chairman
morning.
and members. Item 3 on the agenda is a proposal to make minor amendments to certain CBA forms and regulations as provided in attachments 1 through 9 to ensure CBA collects the email addresses from its licensees and applicants. As you know, Assembly Bill 1521, the CBA's sunset extension legislation, passed the legislature, and staff anticipate that the governor will sign it into law. Among the provisions of the bill It is a requirement for all applicants and licensees who possess a valid email address to provide it to the CPA. Since the forms in question are incorporated by reference within our regulations, CBA approval of the forms and related regulation is required. The changes proposed to some of the existing forms would delete the word optional where a space has been provided for an email address, and makes other minor conforming changes to specified forms to provide for email address collection. Staff recommends the CPC approve the motion indicated on page 2 to approve the regulatory text and forms incorporated by reference in CPA regulation sections 15.1, 16, 19, and 20, and to authorize the executive officer to initiate the formal rulemaking process for a section 100 change, including submitting the text and form changes to OAL. I am happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Are there any questions or issues for discussion from the board members?
One, and it might be completely unrelated to this, so once you have emails provided, what's the process for somebody updating their email? If they wanted to change it, is that something they can do by just calling? Is it, or would it only occur at the next submission of the renewal form that they might submit?
Mr. Bone may be able to answer that question for him.
Good morning, sir. So individuals will have the opportunity to provide that through the application forms. We are also in the process of developing an online submission process for individuals to submit to us electronically. I'll be covering that later on in my item. There's a CBA agenda item on this topic. Due to the volume, as you can imagine, of email addresses that we may receive, having as many online processes as possible is going to make that as smooth.
Okay. And then I guess the second question, I saw on page 2 of the memo the various attachments or forms that were being revised and retired status, military status, so various. What about the primary forms, like the main applicant? I was just thinking of a normal active licensee renewal. Like, I didn't see that as one of the attachments. Did those not require a change?
A number of forms are not incorporated by reference in our regulations, and those do not need approval. Because it's simple, ongoing function. Those forms are in process and are utilized by the board. They're not in regulation, so to speak.
So if I understand what you're saying, only these forms are specifically called out as to, a statute in here, and the other ones are not, and so we don't have to make it, they've already been revised.
We don't have to go through a rulemaking process on those
Gotcha.
forms.
All right. I would move approval of the recommendation that is listed on page 2 of the memorandum with this agenda item.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve this item. Is there any further discussion from the board? May I have a roll call, please?
Okay, Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
and Jose Campos.
Yes.
The matter has indeed passed. Thank you very much, Mr. Wright.
Thank you.
Before we close, I want to ask if there are any public comments from the public. Seeing none, I'm going to ask the members of the committee if anyone has any agenda items for our next meeting. Seeing none, and I've never done this before, meeting is adjourned.